You're in the building on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
You're in it.
We're usually down. We're usually down in the evening.
Perfect.
We're usually down at the bar about 7:30. Go for a beer before we go on air.
Yeah, you have to. I haven't been to that bar yet. I'll buy you around.
Cool. That's good.
Thanks, Bill.
Appreciate it.
Okay, shall we? We're already 5 minutes behind schedule, and that's mostly because I think everybody in the room was trying to talk to Greg. Hey, wait a minute. We'll circle around here. It is my great pleasure to introduce Beth Agnew. Beth is the chair of the School of Media and has been involved in the design of this conference from the start. She will be moderating this panel, so I will leave it in her capable hands. Beth.
Thank you very much. And first, what I would like to do is really just acknowledge our wonderful journalism faculty. A few of them are here today. And if you could stand up or wave your hand or otherwise signify. We've got Bill Hutchison and Barbara Keynes, Mike Abadi and Jerry Boris. Who else? And Andrew Mayer, of course. Did we miss anybody? Nobody escaped. And of course, Linda Calvert. So please give them a round of applause. They are the reason we have such excellent journalism students. Our panel, of course, we've just heard from Greg Agvent, who is the Senior Director of CNN Air. We are also going to hear from Troy Gallant, Senior Manager of Live Services for CP24. He is an experienced UAV pilot and was formerly with CTV. And we have also Anjali Semple, who is Manager of Field Operations at CBC News. And we will hear one presentation to begin with from Anjali. Please go ahead.
Hello. There is no doubt that filming with drones has radically changed the way we approach our storytelling and has pushed the boundary of what we are able to achieve. By now, we are used to seeing sweeping aerial shots on the news and documentary or current affairs production, but drones haven't necessarily taken over, and there are a few reasons for that. First, it's partly because journalists are being thoughtful in their use of this new tool in their toolbox of tech. Aerial videography forces you to think differently and creatively about the possibilities that these aerial visuals can provide the narrative of a story. It's a unique perspective, and nothing communicates the scale or magnitude of a setting or situation the way a drone does. And just like in traditional videography and filming, your shots have to make sense and have to serve a useful purpose to the story you are telling. Otherwise, the eye and the ear will be in conflict, and the eye will always win that battle. The second reason why drones haven't necessarily taken over is because the biggest challenge in drone production is everything leading up to getting off the ground. And our pilots and producers can tell you it's a heavy lift. Flying a drone is the fun part. That's the reward for everything you've put into making your aerial photography a reality. It has generally taken a lot of manpower and perseverance to acquire all the approvals needed to fly, and even more so in controlled airspace. Of course, now with the new regulations, we are looking forward to a smoother process. Of CBC's 8 drone pilots in 6 cities across the country, including Quebec City, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Regina, and Edmonton, we have collectively flown over 700 hours in the air, made up of more than 2,700 drone flights since our operation began in 2015. Within those 2,700 flights, we have only covered a total of 4 breaking news stories. One in 2018, covering the New Brunswick flooding, and 3 over this past week, again covering devastation caused by flooding in Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick. As the public broadcaster, covering breaking news is our bread and butter. Canadians rely on us for important information, and it's our duty to provide this public service. So when news happens, we're there, except not necessarily in the air. We understand that this is largely a result of needing to keep the airspace above an emergency free from any obstacles or interference from drones, ensuring the responding authority is able to attend to the situation. To give you an example of the complexities of covering natural disaster, Coming back to just this past week, Transport Canada issued a directive to close the airspace for 5 nautical miles, which is 9.2 kilometers, around flooded areas to all drones except anybody operating under the authority of public safety organizations. After days of negotiations and many phone calls and emails, we did manage to get the approvals to fly over flooded areas in Quebec. This in itself was unprecedented. Our team did an extraordinary job covering the situation both on the ground and in the air, helping to disseminate important information to the public in Montreal and the Ottawa-Gatineau regions. We also sent in a drone team to Bracebridge, where it was declared a state of emergency over flooded areas. We hope that news organizations like the CBC can continue to be seen as providing a public safety service through their drone operations in emergencies to help Canadians understand the magnitude of natural disasters and other breaking news, to help people plan and prepare accordingly. Our drone pilots take their job seriously and aim to set an example for the RPAS industry, and especially when it comes to drones in journalism. We've had countless success stories, thanks in large part to the people involved in awarding us the approvals we have sought over the past several years. When you think of the cost of running a drone program, it's important to look past the purchase of the actual drone. What some might not realize is the number of hours that go into actually successfully flying a drone. It includes studying the regulations, learning about aviation, receiving practical training, and building in a lot of time to practice. So with every success story, we are able to justify the importance of continuing to invest in our drone operations. For those of you training to become a pilot, it's important to always take your job as a pilot seriously. Follow the rules and find time to practice. Practice orbiting, practice 2 and 3 axis shots, and learn how to add creativity and context to your videos to make all that hard work and attention to detail worth what you put into making it all possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Angeline. And now Troy.
Thank you. I'm a little bit more unconventional because I believe in pretty pictures, so you guys can play this beautiful video. I work at CP24. It's also part of the Bell Media family. We also have CTV Toronto, CTV National. We started flying in 2015. This is one of our first 10 flights. This is actually with Transport Canada. They came to us with a problem. There was the Hearn Stacks on Cherry Street. They needed to do an Illuminato festival. They were going to shine lights off of it. So they asked us to fly with them at 900 feet and basically see if a plane was going to see these lights coming off the Hearn Stack. Save Transport Canada time, save us time. This is breaking news. Breaking news for us happens every single day, every single half hour, 18 hours a day at CP24. What I'm showing you is what happens in breaking news is we have to get to the scene. After we get to the scene, we realize the story can develop for a little bit longer. So now you're seeing sort of a culmination of pictures that happen after we've been to the scene initially for breaking news, and then we go back. You know, this is the MacArthur Mallory House. We went there about 10 days after the initial scene, after we got permissions. This is something we sort of experimented with a little bit. This is a FLIR camera. The firefighters are interested in that. In 2015 is when we started flying, but when we actually started figuring out how to fly was in 2014. We had a team of management members to go out to Ottawa and figure out with Transport Canada, how are we going to actually fly? How are we going to do this safely? And we started realizing very quickly that Transport Canada and Nav Canada, along with our emergency friends, we need to work together. So we started developing a relationship with them. Now, when you build a relationship with Transport Canada and Nav Canada, you need to nurture that relationship. So in the start of 2015, you needed to be able to get a single SFOC, for one location. And then you continue to build it up, and then you got a blanket SFOC. Well, that sort of helps you a little bit. Now you get to fly for a blanket. You get to fly in Class G airspace. Well, not every single breaking news scene or any scene happens in Class G airspace, and you got to drive there usually. But what we did with Transport Canada is we started asking for permission. Every single flight, no matter what, if it was G class, D class, anything we wanted to do, we asked permission. This is one of the big ones we asked for. This is Toronto Island. How do you fly to Toronto Island? You're within the aerodrome of Billy Bishop. We fly to Toronto Island at 6 a.m. in the morning before the airport opens, and you have to be done flying at 6:15. CP24, Bell Media's drone program is essentially driven from our engineering team. They actually started this. It wasn't the news guys. The engineering team said, this is cool. So as a news guy, we sort of did everything. The news guys, the engineers, the floaters, the camera guys, we all fly. We're all one team. So we have 12 people that are currently trained. We at Bell Media have sort of evolved the program, and we use it in different facets because we're a big company. Within Toronto, we have roughly 2,000 employees. Well, within 2,000 employees, that's Bell Media. Then we have also got this big boss, Bell BCE. So they've asked us to do certain things for us. So we've done corporate events. You're seeing an inspection here. This radio tower fell over. They called us up and said, go find out where a new tower should go. So we did. Our friends at Bell Mobile called us and said, come take this promo video of a cell phone tower out in the middle of nowhere. The other thing that happens is we also have writers and producers and EPs that are like, we don't have this B-roll. This thing's opening up and we want to go get awesome B-roll. Well, you got to get there early, and that's what we did with the 407 highway, the news TTC station. So this was done in the winter. The other big thing we've done now is we're Bell, and we have reality programming. So this is Dogtails. This is a show that was on Gusto. And so now we also get pulled out and do reality programming. That's pretty much what our program is and how we do everything at Bell Media.
Thank you, Troy. And now a few more words from Greg Agvent.
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay, so we've heard it all, have we? Until the questions start. So this morning we heard from a panel of educators on how they were integrating drone journalism into their curriculum. Earlier this afternoon we heard from the industry experts, IATA and Transport Canada, on the regulatory context. And for us today at Seneca College, this is perhaps the most important panel because they represent major news organizations and in fact are employers of our journalism graduates. And so I'd like to put the question to you, as employers, what do you want to see from our journalism graduates in the relationship to drone journalism? Pretty broad question, probably wide sweeping, but.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, the bottom line is you saw from several presentations now kind of a recipe for success in this. First off, it's acknowledgement and acknowledgement that you're doing it, right? It's a tool that people are going to want to use. It's going to elevate you, and there's so many great puns with drones, right? Well, our program has taken off, all those kind of things, but it's going to separate you from somebody who doesn't have experience with the drone. But it's going to be important to be able to show that you were trained properly and that you have made a commitment to the process. And that commitment might be, in the US, it's the Part 107 commercial license, right? And that's the ceiling, I'm sorry, that's the floor, not the ceiling. That's a base entry, entry level type thing. But if you came to me and you said, hey, I've got my Part 107 and here's my reel and here's my commitments, here's my own personal safety management system, it's gonna elevate you above the next person.
It also allows us to have people coming into our workforce already trained. And we have spent a lot on training, and I think we can estimate it takes about a year for you to be ready to fly independently. So if you walk in that door already having all that training. It's a huge burden off the employer, as long as we implement our own ways of ensuring that you are well qualified as far as our standards go. It is a definite positive for us, and we look for people who are responsible and take safety seriously and journalism seriously. And even if you understand drone journalism and don't necessarily fly, that's okay too, because if you can speak the language and have some interesting ideas and can find ways to use drones to help your storytelling, that will also help you in the future. Troy?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's something, if we see it on a resume, that's certainly going to be a little light bulb that goes off and will help us go, oh, maybe we should really look into this. They're already advanced licensed. It's something that would definitely help on a resume.
I think there's a comment that you just made that bears repeating, and that's that whole idea that, you know, so much is, we focus so much on the technical capabilities, and can't tell you how many times I alone have said safety today, but the creative, when you put a creative mind, when I say we're just scratching the surface, it goes to that as well, not just from a technological standpoint, but from putting a drone and those capabilities, the ability to creatively think of how to use that drone. That's an area that will separate a candidate from somebody else as well.
And that has yet to be explored. I mean, we've spent so much time perfecting our camera work with lighting and depth of field and the right lenses, and now we have to transition that into the air because it's completely different. Depth of field is not going to help you in the air, right? So what is it that you're going to do to actually make your shot stand out beyond just something that's a sweeping aerial?
When we first started, you guys probably had the same thing. I would get calls every day from typical, I just retired from the Air Force. I flew F-15 Strike Eagles for the last 15 years, and now I've started a drone business. And he would send me a reel, and he could probably fly the daylights out of an aircraft, but he couldn't figure out how to work the camera part of the equation. So I like to say that, the drone is a little bit science and a little bit art. But for us as content creators, we can teach people science. We can teach people stick and rudder skills. We can teach people how to be safe. Creativity is inherent.
And that's what's going to give this type of work a life.
Agreed.
Yeah. We, at Bell Media, we've sort of done a two-pronged approach here. We fly drones that are just one man with a visual spotter, but a lot of the times we pull out a bigger machine with two controllers. So we allow an engineer, an RF tech, to fly the thing, a nuts and bolts kind of person. But the other person that's on the camera is usually a camera person. And when you put that thing and you pop it up, it's a whole new canvas. You've got anywhere to go. So you have to respect that sort of space that you're in, and you have to know how to use that new expanded space.
So it's a matter of knowing your technology really well and being able to problem solve in the field. The lighting is what it is in the field. You can't really do much to change the lighting. But you have to take a creative approach to telling the story with the drone. There's stories about drones, but there's stories with drones. And the stories with drones need that creative eye, that artistic approach.
Yeah.
You mentioned getting a reel. How does a young journalism grad develop a reel?
Fly. Fly often. Fly when you're done flying, charge your batteries, fly some more, right? Perfect the, it's interesting. We were talking earlier about that there is no one size fits all to any of this stuff. There are small drones, and we have a range of drones from the really small to the really big, and we fly with 2-man and 3-man teams at times. But the reality is that most of you are going to probably end up working with a small backpackable type drone that you're going to pop up in the air on occasion. And if you have access to it through Seneca, utilize that and go out and work on that and try to craft that creative approach. Try to work on that. How do I do that? I think you said it in your presentation. We've seen enough kind of faux or pseudo helicopter shots. That's not that's not value added. So really exercising that creativity and trying to figure out how you can make the most out of that aircraft. I mean, you're working in every dimension, right? You're able to create in every dimension. You can move in every dimension. So you gotta go full on Matrix and think like Neo.
And when you fly, you're practicing. You've got to try things because you think it might work, you think it might not work, but you're gonna try it. And like every situation's different. Flying over a flood's different. You got to tell the story of the water. You fly over an explosion, that's a completely different story. And you almost have to get up there and sort of know what you want to do, but you also have to be able to take in that creative input and be like, oh, this might work now that I see this new information.
You have to interpret the space around you. And as you were talking, I thought of a fairly recent example. There was at this Hurricane Michael in Mexico Beach, Florida, there was a school gymnasium that essentially had both ends of the gymnasium wiped out. And it was actually one of our competitors, but I give them credit for it. They actually looked at that space and said, you know what? We're gonna fly real low. We're gonna show you the deficit. They actually flew through the gym. But when you saw that perspective, daylight on one end and daylight on the other, and popped up once they cleared that space and saw devastation everywhere. And oh, by the way, the ends of the school, the building were like laying flat there. It had this oh wow, kind of moment, which comes all too often in hurricanes and stuff like that. But it all tends to look the same until you do something that's truly unique.
Can I just mention one more thing on the reel? Is when you send in a reel, we want to make sure that everybody's flying safe. So don't send in something that's going to be illegal because it'll be pretty easy to spot it and figure out why were you in that location? Are you next to the CN Tower? Like, how did you do that? And then we're just going to call Nav Canada and Transport Canada and ask them how they did that because we want to do it.
And getting to the point of flying is all part of the process too, right?
Yeah.
And I think for every 1 hour that you're flying, it takes about a minimum of 4 to 8 hours of planning. You saw that Parliament Hill shoot that we did. We flew over Class F airspace. I mean, that has never been done before, those shots that we had. And that took 14 weeks of planning and negotiating and building those relationships to get the approvals to be able to take those shots. And so we wouldn't have been able to do that had we not had the practice in the planning process, been able to prove that, oh, we do fly safely. So when you send in a reel, it will really show whether or not you have been prepared or not.
So the challenge then for us is to build into our curriculum time for the students to get supervised, safe, effective practice so that they can build a reel, so they can take those shots, so they get that flight time essentially during the curriculum where we have some proper supervision and can ensure that their reel is going to be good when they go out to show it.
Exactly.
And there's also maps and understanding how to read them, understanding weather. Like, it is endless. There is so much work to do before you fly. So don't even bother until you get a good handle on that, because that's what's really going to show whether or not you're taking this seriously or not.
I think our 2-year program just became a 3-year program.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. How about qualifications? When somebody comes to you, they've got a decent reel, what kind of qualifications do they have to have in addition to just the drone aspect?
I can answer a bit of that. We actually had one guy from our operations division come up to us. Well, we've had countless people, but one of our guys came up to us and he goes, listen, I've actually taken the same program you guys took. I just took it by myself. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you took the initiative to do that. Well, show me what you've done. He's like, well, I sort of got a reel online. I was like, okay, let's look at it. And once I looked at it, I was like, okay, he's on the team. And so then we had our insurance. We had him added to our insurance. And it was a little bit of less of a burden because, again, I didn't need to train this guy. He took it upon himself. And so I just figured out that he was good for our insurance. We did a flight review amongst the team with him. We took him out a few times, and he blew our socks off and was telling us stuff. It doesn't hurt that he's also a great camera guy. And that's what we did. We just made sure insurance was fine with it, and we made sure the team was okay with it.
And it's really important to be more than a drone pilot. The reality is you're not going to do that full time, at least at this point in time. We have half of our drone team here, and every one of them has another job. And they do all their jobs very well. We have built it into our operation that if you are going to be a part of the drone team, that is your priority when there is something to do related to drones. Otherwise, you are doing your day job, which is either producing or videography or video producing.
So to follow up on that, because I think you're spot on, what then becomes the way in for a beginning journalist? Well, first off, it's getting your foot in the door is the first thing. I'm sure everybody has a similar story. Any teacher in this room or anybody who's in the profession didn't start where they are now, right? I started in the mailroom, you know, and worked my way up. It's important when you to take your credentials. I don't want to say pay your dues. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. If you have talent, it's going to be recognized, but you have to get your foot in the door. I think it's highly unlikely that you'll be hired as a drone pilot. You're going to be hired as a content creator. And there's a lot of people that say that there's a downward trend in journalism. I think it's the exact opposite. I think this is a golden age for journalism and requires people like you to come out and really push, the envelope. There's been a democratization of the avenues for communication. Hasn't always been done well or correctly or even, ethically. But that avenue for communicating to an audience is out there. And I think it's one of those things that some of the smaller startups are some of the most intriguing opportunities for new journalists.
And I think drones are here to stay.
Oh, that's for sure.
And we have to decide whether or not we're going to be followers or leaders, right? And I think CBC has made that decision. And whether or not drones recreationally are a fad or a trend or the next iPhone, it doesn't really matter because we see a value that it brings to our journalism. And I don't think we should be willing to live without it.
So we'll continue to work with you to develop a curriculum that is consistent with the needs that you have as those needs evolve and change, because the drone industry itself is going to change as journalism changes overall. Speaking of jobs and roles, one of the things that we try and instill in all our graduates is the willingness and the knowledge to jump in wherever. You may have to be behind a camera, in front of a camera, working in the back room, pulling copy, doing whatever it takes, and having that go-getter sort of attitude. What sort of roles might somebody find themselves in if they're attached to a drone team?
Well, the guy I was explaining earlier that did the program just like we did, he was a TVA. Literally, one day we needed another body on a show, and we were flying a drone, and he just started poked his head in and oh, there's a drone here? And that's how that started. But on our team, we have guys that are transmitter techs. We have RF techs, the guys that go up to the CN tower, make sure that signal works. We also have floaters, guys that press buttons, TDs, what else do they do? Audio. We have a girl on the team that she's a coordinator of all of our live eyes. Everybody has their day job and everybody has their drone job. Good.
I'll say there's nothing more appreciated from a producer in the field than somebody who's willing to do what it takes, whatever it takes, to make something happen. That might be running to charge batteries. It might be running to get food. It might be running to find a bathroom for the team. And, there's all kinds of efforts. I mean, there's a rather distinct line, and I say this from experience. There's a distinct line of people in the field. There are the prima donnas, and there are the people who make it happen. And you want to be one of the people who make it happen. Okay? There's no room for prima donnas.
A lot of our journalism grads start out freelancing.
Sure.
Is there a role for stringers, for freelancers? How do they approach you if they want to get connected?
What are they freelancing doing?
Good question. Suppose they want to get, because we're talking about drones, suppose they want to get connected to the drone team.
So the best way for us is, shoot us an email. That's sort of one way. I find that the best freelancers actually nag me. to the point of like, why am I getting a third email, a seventh email, an 18th email? Okay, let's look at this. Oh, good. You got a Mac, and you gotta have Drive. I don't know what it is, or I can't tell you how to have Drive, but if you're writing an email or you're calling someone, I think I've been around for a little while sort of hiring people, I can tell Drive pretty quick. That's what I look for.
And there is room for freelancers in this industry because we're not going to make it to every shoot, right? There is a significant cost involved in our own operations that we need to be willing to say, can we afford a drone for this or not? Can we send two people in addition to the crew that's covering any story on the ground, whether it be current affairs or news, that if there is freelance footage and it's ready to go, and then there's definitely a place for that.
And as you've said, it needs to be accompanied with some kind of documentation, or at least when you look at it, you recognize that it's been done safely by somebody who's qualified.
Oh, exactly. We get requests all the time. So Bell Media is a little bit different when we take freelance video in. Is now anything we've got to process, that any video that comes in drone gets sent to a drone email. There's a few managers on it. We look at the video, and then we start asking the questions. Well, was there an SFOC? Where was it taken? Who did it? Did they have insurance? Once those check marks come off, then we allow ourselves to use it. Our legal team's a little different than Greg's. They're a little bit more reserved. So they're going to say, if you use that video, you're in charge of that video. So we have to be really careful.
Any other comments you'd like to make before we throw it open to the floor?
How did Greg manage to get a full-time drone pilot? That would be nice. That's a goal for us.
Oh, wow. How did we do it? We start, I mean, honestly, the only reason, sometimes it's better to have good timing than be good. And I think it was good timing. It just so happened that for us, Part 107 in the US was the entry level, it was that commercial license. And we had been working along with the FAA to that point. And quite honestly, we got so much good press for CNN and for first waivers and for all that kind of stuff. My bosses kind of couldn't say no. I probably should ask for 3.
How about some questions? Any questions for our panel?
Hi guys, can you tell us some of your, I mean, and Greg, you've had no incidents and congrats, but have you made stupid mistakes in the beginning or things that you learned that, and things that would help us teach people new to drones, help us understand some of the mistakes you've learned from in the beginning?
Communication. That's actually probably one of the reasons, or one of the things that I say we've made a mistake in huge. You can't communicate enough. Like when that thing is in the air, you have to have a team, you have to be able to understand what the mission is. So what does the whole point of us being here with a drone? Why can't we just send our helicopter? We also, CT has a helicopter. So when we're in the air and we're communicating as a team, I find sometimes we struggle. It's like, well, what are you doing? Where are we going? Like, oh, I want to do this. But he's not telling you what he's doing. You know, he's just moving. Oh, what's the whole point? I feel like if the team communication is a big thing for us. And I think that's one of the big factors we actually work on a lot of the time. And making sure the team talks. Have the toolbox meeting before the actual thing goes up. And making sure that the client or the EP or the senior executive gets what they want.
And I can add to that I can assure you that just about every expert drone operator has had a near miss or something close to a flyaway. It's the reality, and each one of those experiences are learning opportunities, and you hope that all of your planning reduces significantly any catastrophic risk when those near misses happen.
I'll say this, I'll offer 2 things. One, there's a very specific definition of incident. And it doesn't mean we haven't crashed drones. We've crashed some drones. It hasn't raised to the level of an incident, of a reportable incident to an FAA or an insurance company or any of that kind of stuff. But we've crashed a few drones. there's only two kinds of drone pilots in the world today. Those that have crashed and those that will. But the most important lesson, or one of the most important lessons I've learned that I could pass along to you all, was I learned in the very first shoot we ever undertook, and it was in Selma, Alabama. It was we were telling the story of the bridge over the Alabama River, a movie, it was a famous movie, there was a big civil rights situation down there 50 years ago. And we were flying first light, because we couldn't fly over the bridge when there were cars over the bridge. So we were there, dark, whatever. And we're flying, and the pilot at that point was he was a freelancer. He was landing every few minutes and popping the SD card and running the SD card over to his laptop and dubbing the footage. And I was like, what are you doing? Get up in the air. We only have a limited amount of time. And he deadpanned to me. He was like, chill, Greg. If I fly and I put this drone in the drink and you have no video, you're going to be really mad at me. So I'm going to make sure that you have video. And so I said, now I get it. Pop the card. Do whatever it takes. But simple things like that, really start to resonate. We have a standard operating procedure type list, where when we learn these little bits and pieces, tricks of the trade, or however you want to call it, we try to document it. For us, it's institutional knowledge, right? How do you share that institutional knowledge? It's communications on steroid, right, within your company. And I think that's so important. So if you have 20 students who are out flying, every one of them is going to have a different experience, and maybe a different solution. So how do you share that? I think is important. It's also part of our safety management system, by the way.
And we put that in our actual checklist every day when we're flying. If there is something to note, you have to let the team know. And we have a major team, Thanks.
Question back here.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Stephen, and I'm a journalism student at Seneca College. And it's like a two-part question for all three of you, so anything you can answer. So my first question is, we learned throughout the day, like, the safety regulations and, like, safe flying. But do you have any kind of small tips for new freelancers starting out that they could kind of give them an advantage over someone else? And then the second part of the question is, as up and coming freelancer, what kind of things can we put on our demos to send to you guys that would give us a better chance of it getting produced in a way?
So I'll start with what you can practice. I'd say practice things like ADDI mode. The A doesn't stand for automatic. Don't make that mistake. ADDI mode will take GPS off your drone, and it will essentially fly away with the wind. And there will be occasions where you could potentially lose GPS when you're flying, and if you haven't experienced that, it could be disastrous. So once you get comfortable, practice ADDI mode, get comfortable with those controls. It becomes extra sensitive. And it's really stressful and difficult, but if you can master that, you're in a good place. And in terms of demo reel, just get something that looks really good.
For us, one of the things that we do practice quite a bit is, the DJI products is what we have, the return to home. You got to understand what return to home does, because if you lose lock of the controller, DJI is going to bring that thing home. Well, if you don't understand how return to home works, you're going to be in trouble. Because we had a situation once where we put a return to home. It started coming home, and we realized that it was going to come home between a set of trees. Well, if we didn't know at the time, and it hit and it propped and it fell over, and we were like, oh, we got to learn from that. So you have to realize what return to home is. So you should know every feature of that drone and what it exactly does and what it doesn't do when it's not there. I would go to class G space, just drive 2 hours north and away from an airport, and just go film as much as you can. Recharge those batteries, put an inverter in your car, and just go for it. And make pretty pictures happen. There's a lot of beautiful country, a few hours up that way.
I think it's important to say again, nagging works. Works for my wife. Seriously.
Careful,
You
my wife's
can't. If you send me one email, and that's it, I don't know you from Adam. If you send me an email consistently and you show me that you have, you could be that little bit of a pain and you're willing to take that risk, it could pay off. Now, we don't hire a lot of freelancers. I have enough pilots out there, but we do maintain a trusted, we call it a trusted vendor list. And I had said earlier that for us, Part 107 in the States was the floor, not the ceiling. I can't tell you the number of guys who sent me, I got my Part 107 and here's my reel and it's treetops. And if I see one more reel with treetops, I'll probably lose my mind. So don't send treetops.
I might recommend professional nagging, not just nagging. Professional nagging where you add a little bit of content, you show a little bit more of your personality, you show that you're growing as a journalist, and you're getting their attention properly. Any other questions? Sean?
I was just wondering if there was anything you could change about the regulations, either for the Canadian government or for the American government. What would those be and why?
I can add to that. Coming back to being able to report on breaking news, it would be nice to have some sort of an exception for news organizations for us to be able to do our jobs and to be able to inform the public. That would make a huge difference for us, and in terms of having the freedom to report on any story regardless of where it is in the country. I think that would be important.
Well, I work at CP24, Toronto's breaking news. I'm in the same exact boat. Again, a lot of the video you made to see, we have to call and get permission. And if that guy's on vacation, it's an email sitting there. And we'll get to it, just like what happened in Bracebridge with us. We wanted to fly Muskoka near the airport. The guy took a vacation day. He got back to me the next day and gave me permission, but by then it was too late and they closed the airspace. So I had to actually drive a little bit further outside of the Muskoka airport and fly in Class G space. Changing things in this new regulation, I would like it to be a person. I'd like to call a person and ask and start figuring that out. I work 18 hours a day, our broadcast is 18 hours a day, my wife will attest that I work 18 hours a day. I would like to be able to call at any given time because news happens at any given time. But hopefully that can sort of come out of this.
And I think I'll just echo the previous sentiments. I mean, I think it's, in the States, we have a First Amendment right to exercise our journalism. We don't have that same right necessarily in the air to have some kind of carve out or some kind of, some specific way that identifies me as a safe, professional, responsible journalist in the air would separate it, would pay off immediately for our industry, and I think for the drone industry as well. It's easy to ask for. To get there, it's built on some of the other things that have to be put in place, like remote identification. There's one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty will happen to you when you fly a drone. The first person to visit you will be law enforcement. And he's going to ask you who you are, and do you have the authority to be here? Now the third question he'll ask is, can I try? The answer is no, okay? But say it nicely. But the bottom line is we have to get to that point where from a I deal with the FBI, the Secret Service, all the law enforcement agencies in the US because I want to use my drones to cover the president, to cover the presidential election, to cover the debates and the conventions and all the things that are happening in less than a year, starting in less than a year. But I have to penetrate that security cordon, as it were. And so I feel for these guys who their job is security, because they don't know currently that I am who I am when I'm in the air. Remote identification is an absolute requirement before this industry can really reach its level.
Thank you. Question over here.
Good afternoon. I'm a tower crane operator, so my eyes are in the sky all the time. So what I've seen here is a lot of talk above what students are really getting at. And instructors, I think, should focus on team. That's been a real key word here. So if a gamer is a good pilot, let him be the pilot on the team. You know, don't put the bad pilot on the team as the drone pilot. And if you guys, here's my question, if you guys were to go outside right now and film, let's say, a soccer match, and you had your Millennium Falcon, and you were a student with your junior cap on, junior journalist cap on, do a 1 minute or 2 minute quick review of what you would go out and do right now for the journalist students here. Because this is basically from kindergarten to college. We don't have to talk about anything about, you know, getting way out there and getting remote ID identification, because all that takes is basically a pilot license and calling up traffic control. Hello, I'm here, okay. So technically, put your little cap on right now, please, this is my question, and tell all the students, what would you do within 1 minute? Go outside, and how would you place, and what would you think about, and how would you do that shot of those soccer players?
Is this before or after June 1st?
You decide, how's that?
Do you want to do June 1st, or after June 1st, and I'll do before?
Sure. So after June 1st, first thing we should do is check the class of airspace that you are flying in. If it's Class G and you have your basic, at the very least your basic license with Transport Canada, you can fly. If it's anything other than Class G, then you need permission from Air Traffic Control, NAV Canada, to ensure that you can fly if you have your advanced certificate. That would be my suggestion.
I'm going to take it a little bit further. We're going to go over to the ball field here. We're going to watch a softball game. I would be probably further back. I would probably ask your security department right now to give me a good 100 square spot in the parking lot. I'd cone that off, or we don't have a full-time drone pilot yet, but we have a full-time drone truck. We actually have a vehicle. So we're getting there, we're close. I would cordon off that space. I would get security, I would work that out a few days before, and literally I would put the drone up and start doing aerial shots up and down. I'd probably try to go along the 100 feet, go left and right, and I would probably just do those 2 shots. I think that would sort of get you what you want in a safe environment.
I'm not sure I can sit here and tell you how you're going to shoot something like that. I mean, what we've covered so far is there are restrictions on it, right? And I can tell you how I would potentially do it, but I have tools that you may not have, right? I have a tool that allows me to fly over people in the United States. So if I'm doing it right out here, I'm probably not doing it. If I'm doing it in Buffalo, here's how I would do it, right? I would utilize the right tool, right, for that application. I would know what I'm trying to do. One of the first things we ask our folks is, why are you flying the drone, right? It's not enough to just go fly the drone and throw it up over a soccer game and think that it is creative. It's not, right? So you have to storyboard in your own mind. How are you going to utilize that? Are you going to fly low? Are you going to fly along the sideline? Are you going to get, how does a goalie see oncoming plays, right? Where can you position that craft? I can't tell you exactly how, but I'll tell you, this is how not to do it. And this is a story that is, again, I keep going back to Hurricane Michael. Hurricane Michael devastated Mexico Beach, Florida. 2 days after the hurricane hit, there was a wonderful story in the New York Times about a waterfront house that survived, unscathed, right? So in the midst of devastation, up and down the street, there's one house fully intact. 2. Well, the story was done on 1. I called my guys down in Mexico Beach that day and I said, hey, have you seen this house and why, acknowledge it as a story. When something that severe stands out, that's the creative part of the thing, shoot it. Their response was, we didn't shoot the house, but we were flying from its driveway. So I mean, it's like you don't see the forest through the trees kind of thing. What I'm driving at is you have to take that view, you have to dissect the opportunity in front of you and ask where you can put that camera, that flying camera. And the answer is potentially anywhere. But how are you going to really leverage that? And how do you acknowledge that, hey, there's the story? I don't know.
Thank you. I think we are just about out of time, and we'll wrap it up there. I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your engagement and your questions.